What's up, everyone? Tony from the Cold Case Project, back again. And today, what I want to run with you over is all content shared in these videos is readily available in any Google search. Now, with that said, I take this content, have it rewritten, and upon rewriting it, put it in these videos to spread the word on the thousands and thousands of cold cases of men and women throughout the United States that are just forgotten, and I give this platform to them so their cases and their stories can be told. Now, in addition to that, if you look down below in the description, you're going to see some brand new t-shirt and coffee cup designs I've actually gotten from a couple of my subscribers who have over the years have been giving me some awesome fan art. So with that said, I'm offering a 20% discount code down below if you check that out, and splitting proceeds with them because they are awesome. Been watching me for quite some time, and I definitely think they deserve to be rewarded for some of the work they do on top of being full-time employees also. So once again, if you have any recommendations or any suggestions, comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the video. Like, subscribe. I'm out. Peace.
Christine Hansen's life was not one of wealth or ease, but it was one deeply rooted in family. Born and raised in Michigan, she was a devoted mother to 3 children and lived in Petoskey with her husband. However, her marriage was turbulent, plagued by conflicts exacerbated by her struggles with alcohol. These challenges did not mean she was an absentee mother. She maintained strong ties with her children and her extended family. Despite the hardships within her marriage, Christine was known for her warm and outgoing personality. She had a close relationship with her sisters in Grand Rapids, and they frequently visited one another. Even as she struggled with personal demons, she remained present in the lives of those she loved. That's why, when she suddenly vanished in September of 1974, her disappearance was met with confusion and deep concern. Her husband was the first to report her missing. He claimed that, one day, he discovered suitcases in the backyard of their home, which he took as a sign that Christine had left him. He assumed she had hitchhiked away, perhaps to Grand Rapids where her sisters lived. A week later, he packed up the suitcases and dropped them off at a relative's home there. It wasn't until after he returned to Petoskey that he officially filed a missing persons report. Christine's sisters last saw her in the summer of 1974. She had mentioned plans to visit them in Grand Rapids that fall, even making phone calls to confirm her intention to come. But she never arrived. That silence, the sudden end of communication, was uncharacteristic of her. Despite her struggles, she had never completely cut ties with her family before. For years, there was no trace of Christine. Her Social Security number showed no activity after 1974, and she never renewed her driver's license. Her absence stretched from months into years, and eventually into more than a decade. Her family held on to hope, but with no sign of life, their fears grew. It wasn't until the mid-1980s that the truth behind her disappearance began to unravel. In 1986, police identified a suspect in Christine's presumed murder, Nicholas Brosick Jr., a man with a violent past and a chilling reputation. The breakthrough in the case came from Paul Howell, a friend of Brosick's and the brother of a man Christine had once dated. Howell's testimony would be the key to unraveling what had happened that fateful night in 1974. According to Howell, Christine had shown up at his apartment in Grand Rapids looking for his brother in late September of that year. Howell and Brosick had both been drinking when Christine arrived. What happened next would become the horrifying final moments of Christine's life. Howell stated that he and Brosick left the apartment with Christine in Brosick's yellow van and drove to a field north of Grand Rapids. Once there, Brosick took Christine into the back of the van. Howell remained in the front seat. But what he heard next haunted him for years. Christine's muffled cries, the unmistakable sounds of a brutal beating. The attack lasted between 10 and 15 minutes. Then silence. When Brosick finally returned to the front of the van, Christine was no longer moving. He refused to say what he had done with her. The next day, when Howell confronted him, Brosick brushed it off with chilling indifference, saying, "I took care of it." Other witnesses corroborated elements of Howell's testimony. Brasick's ex-girlfriend, as well as the mother of his child, testified that Brosick had once confessed to killing a woman in his van. According to their statements, he claimed to have buried her body near South Bend, Indiana. Despite searches, Christine's remains were never found. The weight of the evidence was enough to convict Brosick. In 1986, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Though Christine's family finally had answers, the pain of losing her in such a violent manner remained. The lack of a body left an open wound that never fully healed. To this day, authorities have never recovered her remains. Bianca Jones' disappearance is a tragic and complex case that unfolded on December 2, 2011, in Detroit, Michigan. What initially appeared to be a carjacking soon evolved into a chilling account of abuse, deception, and ultimately, a murder that would devastate an entire family. At around 9:45 a.m. on December 2, 2011, DeAndre Lane, Bianca's father, was driving his silver 2004 Mercury Grand Marquis in Detroit, with his 2-year-old daughter strapped in her car seat in the back. Lane, who was on his way to pick up some of Bianca's belongings from her mother's home, was approached by a man driving a small red car. The man claimed that the taillights on Lane's vehicle were broken and suggested that Lane pull over to check. As Lane pulled over at Brush and Custer Streets, a second man approached the vehicle, brandishing a gun. The man then carjacked Lane's vehicle, driving off with Bianca still inside. Lane, stunned by the event, did not immediately call 911, but instead contacted a friend, telling them what had happened. The friend, in turn, called the authorities at 9:40 a.m. Incredibly, the car was found only about 10 minutes later, parked in an alley between Euclid and Philadelphia streets, less than a mile away from the carjacking site. However, there was no sign of Bianca at the scene. Despite an extensive search of the area, there was no trace of the missing child. Bianca had vanished without a trace, and investigators were left grappling with a growing suspicion that foul play was involved. The investigation soon turned toward Bianca's father, DeAndre Lane. Lane was known to have a criminal history, though it had been 8 years since his last arrest before Bianca's disappearance. He had 7 children with different women, and no known history of abuse toward them, although authorities began to scrutinize his actions more closely. Upon reporting the abduction, Lane was taken into custody on an unrelated charge of violating a protective order filed by his ex-wife. He was released 3 days later, but investigators had already begun questioning him intensely. Lane's behavior during the investigation raised more red flags, particularly his failure to call 911 directly after the carjacking. The investigation soon took a darker turn when a cadaver dog, brought in to assist in the search, detected the scent of human remains in several locations linked to Lane. The dog identified the scent in Lane's car, Bianca's car seat, and even in Lane's bedroom. Authorities also noted that the vehicle had been parked less than a mile from the original crime scene, further suggesting that the carjacking story might have been fabricated. In March 2012, Lane was charged with first-degree felony murder, first-degree child abuse, and being a habitual offender. Investigators pieced together a harrowing timeline of events that pointed to a much more sinister truth. It was revealed that Lane had likely killed Bianca the night before she disappeared after she wet the bed. Lane's girlfriend, who had been at the house on the night of December 1st, reported hearing Bianca screaming as Lane yelled at her and struck her with a paddle. The abuse was witnessed by Lane's 15-year-old nephew, who also saw the paddling at 2 a.m. Lane himself later admitted to the abuse, but downplayed the severity of it, claiming that he had not hurt Bianca. He described the paddle as a stick wrapped in a towel and duct tape. According to Lane, after the paddling, Bianca fell out of bed at around 1 a.m. and hit her head. Lane claimed that Bianca stayed awake until 3 a.m., though she appeared a bit out of it, and he used the paddle to tap her on the buttocks to keep her awake. When Lane left his house the next morning, Bianca was covered with a blanket and strapped in her car's seat, but she did not make any noise or try to remove the blanket from her face. Bianca's older sister, who was also in the car, later revealed that Bianca had never attempted to pull the blanket off, though Bianca usually snored when she slept. The sister also reported that when she had wet the bed in the past, her father had punished her, even forcing her underpants in her mouth. In October 2012, Lane was found guilty of felony murder and first-degree child abuse. The jury convicted him based on the evidence of his brutal treatment of Bianca, his failure to act in her best interests, and the lies surrounding the supposed carjacking. Lane was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, although he maintains his innocence. The prosecution's case was bolstered by the evidence of Bianca's abuse and the lack of any signs of her being alive after the alleged carjacking. Investigators believe that Bianca was dead before she was ever reported missing, and that the carjacking was a stage cover-up for her murder. Bianca's body has never been found, and her mother, Bianca Jones, continues to hold on to hope that her daughter is still alive. However, the circumstances of the case, combined with the overwhelming evidence of abuse, make it clear that Bianca's life was tragically cut short. Despite the conviction and the closure it brought to many, Bianca remains hopeful that the truth about what happened to Bianca can come to light in its entirety. Cindy Marie Leco's life was one marked by resilience and determination. Married to Albert Leco III in 1986, she lived in Detroit, Michigan, and together they had a son and a daughter. From the outside, their marriage might have seemed typical, but those who knew Cindy understood the darker reality she faced. Her relationship with Albert was fraught with domestic violence and fear. In 1989 and again in 1992, Cindy filed domestic violence reports against her husband. Despite the abuse, she never pursued criminal charges, often falling into the all-too-common cycle of reconciliation and fear. Albert's apologies would follow his violent outbursts, and Cindy, hoping to preserve her family, would withdraw her complaints. In 1994, Cindy made a decision that would further fracture their already crumbling relationship. She tipped off investigators about 6 pounds of marijuana Albert had concealed in their St. Clair Shores home. Shortly after, she was severely beaten. This time, Albert's actions resulted in a domestic abuse conviction. Facing the possibility of further legal trouble for his drug activities, Albert's temper and resentment towards Cindy grew. Cindy, however, stood firm. She filed for divorce and was awarded temporary custody of their children, along with possession of the family home. Her decision to testify against Albert in his upcoming drug trial was a pivotal point. Once divorced, she would no longer be protected under spousal immunity laws, making her a critical witness for the prosecution. Albert was now facing not only the loss of his family, but also significant legal repercussions. On the evening of October 23, 1994, Cindy spoke to a relative over the phone. She was deeply concerned. Albert had taken their children on a trip to Comins, Michigan, and was due to return. However, he was hours late, and Cindy's anxiety was palpable. By 10 p.m., Albert finally arrived with the children. Witnesses later reported seeing the couple arguing in the front yard of Cindy's home on Evergreen. At one point, Cindy was heard calling for help. Yet, no one contacted the police. Authorities believe that during or shortly after this argument, Albert strangled Cindy inside the house. Evidence suggests he then placed her body in his pickup truck. The next morning, Albert kept their children home from school, a suspicious decision that added weight to the growing theory of foul play. Cindy was officially reported missing on October 24, 1994, when she failed to attend her nursing school classes. 2 days later, on October 26th, her car was found abandoned on 7 Mile Road and Van Dyke Street in Detroit. Albert admitted to parking the car there in an act of spite, but his statements only further fueled suspicions. Inside the car, Cindy's purse was discovered, but her wallet and the handgun she usually carried for protection were missing. Despite extensive searches along Interstate 75 and near the couple's Oscoda County cabin, no trace of Cindy has ever been found. In 2001, after 7 years of suspicion and investigation, Albert Leco was charged with Cindy's murder. Though no body had been recovered, authorities believe they had gathered enough circumstantial evidence to bring him to trial. Prosecutors built their case around Albert's history of abuse, his conflicting statements, and testimony from witnesses who recalled his threats against Cindy. A friend of Albert's testified that Albert had openly expressed his desire to get rid of Cindy. Yet, despite this damning testimony, Albert maintained his innocence. His children, now older, took the stand in his defense. They insisted that Cindy had left willingly and was still alive. They also testified that, on the night their mother was allegedly murdered, they had been asleep in Albert's truck and heard nothing unusual. In December 2001, Albert was acquitted of all charges. The jury's decision rested heavily on the absence of Cindy's body and the lingering possibility that she had chosen to disappear. Albert walked free, but the question surrounding Cindy's fate remained unanswered. Did Albert Leco truly murder Cindy, as prosecutors alleged, and successfully conceal her remains? Could Cindy have fled her troubled life, leaving behind her children and everything she knew? Was there a third party involved in her disappearance, unknown to both the prosecution and defense? While Albert maintains his innocence, many remain convinced that Cindy met with foul play. Her family continues to seek answers, refusing to let her memory fade. The unresolved case serves as a grim reminder of the dangers faced by victims of domestic violence and the challenges in achieving justice without definitive proof. Cindy Marie Leco has now been missing for 30 years. She will be 59 years old today. For her family, closure remains elusive, but they hold on a hope that one day the truth will be uncovered. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Cindy Leco, please contact the St. Clair Shores Police Department. Your tip could provide the breakthrough needed to solve this enduring mystery. On August 31st, 1981, the home of 24-year-old Carolyn Sue Martin in Madison Heights, Michigan, was filled with family and friends who had gathered to help her pack. Carolyn was preparing for a fresh start, planning to leave that night with her 2-year-old son, Mark Stephen Martin, to travel south to San Antonio, Texas. Her fiancé, Hampersome Harry Carisian, had recently secured a job at an auto shop in Texas and wanted them to join him. Initially, Carolyn had intended to travel in a caravan with her twin brother, Timothy, who was heading west to Oklahoma in search of employment. However, as the day progressed, her plans shifted. That evening, Carolyn made one final stop at her mother's home in Hazel Park, Michigan, to say goodbye. While visiting, she shared unexpected news. She would no longer be traveling with Timothy and had decided to take a different route to Texas. Her family listened, unaware this would be the last time they would see Carolyn or young Mark. Days turned into weeks, then months, with no word from Carolyn or Mark. Concerns soon transformed into fear. By the following spring, her family made the painful decision to file a missing persons report. Carolyn and Mark had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a growing sense of dread. When questioned by authorities, Harry Carisian's account of their disappearance raised more questions than answers. He claimed that at some point during the trip, Carolyn abruptly changed her mind about moving to Texas. According to him, after they left the Detroit metro area, she asked him to pull over along I-75 near Toledo, Ohio. He stated that Carolyn wanted to end the trip, so he complied. Carisian said he let Carolyn and Mark out of his vehicle, a black 1978 or 1979 Pontiac Grand Prix, which bore a Michigan license plate number SSC 512 that expired in 1981. Reports conflict on the exact year of the car. According to him, Carolyn had only a single suitcase with her. Carisian further claimed that before parting ways, he handed Carolyn $4,000 in cash. Strangely, he also said that she instructed him to discard the rest of her belongings. After leaving Carolyn and Mark on the side of the highway, Carisian reportedly continued on his way to Texas. However, he said that after experiencing car troubles, he changed his mind and returned to Michigan. Despite these troubling statements, he maintained he had no further contact with Carolyn or Mark. Over the years, Harry Carisian's actions cast even more suspicion upon him. Following Carolyn and Mark's disappearance, he changed his name twice and is now known as Harry Carisian. Notably, Carisian refused to take a polygraph test in connection with the case. While polygraph tests are not always admissible in court and are not foolproof, his refusal only deepened the authorities' doubts about his story. Before the summer of 1981, Carisian had minimal involvement in his son's life. Carolyn had filed a paternity suit against him earlier that year, seeking financial support from Mark. In June 1981, the Macomb County Circuit Court confirmed Carisian's paternity and ordered him to pay $30 a week in child support. After this ruling, Carisian's involvement in Mark's life increased, and his relationship with Carolyn appeared to improve. Carolyn was hopeful about the future. She believed she and Carisian had reconciled and was optimistic about starting a new life together in Texas. But that future never came to pass. When Carolyn and Mark vanished, Carisian was the last person known to have seen them alive. Despite his questionable statements and refusal to cooperate further, there was no direct evidence to link him to a crime. Investigators strongly suspected foul play. Carolyn and Mark's Social Security numbers have never been used since 1981, further supporting the belief that something terrible happened to them. Despite their suspicions, law enforcement has never been able to uncover sufficient evidence to file charges against Carisian. The disappearance devastated Carolyn's twin brother, Timothy, who has spent decades searching for answers. Timothy recalled how, upon arriving at his parents' house to say goodbye, Carolyn, Mark, and Carisian had already gone. In his words, "All of a sudden my heart just fell out of my chest. Right then I knew something was wrong." That gut-wrenching instinct has never faded. In 2019, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created an age progression image of Mark Martin, depicting what he might look like at 40 years old. Upon seeing the image, Timothy was overwhelmed, stating, "It almost took me to the floor." It was a reality check, I guess, because it wasn't that 2.5-year-old sandy blonde-haired boy I was looking at. I was looking at a man. Timothy remains hopeful that Mark may still be alive, even if he is unaware of his true identity. He has a simple message for his nephew. Reach out to local law enforcement. You have a family. I'm not going to quit. There's no quitting in my DNA. I'm going to find them, and I'm going to get the answers. Despite the passage of more than 4 decades, Carolyn and Mark's family continue their relentless search for answers. Authorities are still urging anyone with information about their disappearance to come forward. Those with information are encouraged to contact the Madison Heights Police Department at 248-585-2100. At the time of her disappearance, Carolyn Sue Martin was a 24-year-old Caucasian woman of medium build, standing 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing approximately 110 pounds. She had brown shoulder-length hair and blue eyes. Her ears were pierced, and she was likely wearing a cubic zirconia engagement ring. Carolyn had a historical fracture in her arm, which could be identifiable on an X-ray. Mark Stephen Martin was just 2 years old when he disappeared. He was a Caucasian male, standing about 2 feet 7 inches tall, and weighing approximately 30 pounds. He had sandy light brown hair and brown eyes. Mark may have had a lazy eye, and he was sometimes referred to by the nickname Marky. If alive today, Carolyn would be 68 years old, and Mark would be 46. For Carolyn's family, the pain of unanswered questions endures. All they seek is the truth, to know what happened to Carolyn and Mark so that they can finally find closure. After 44 years, the search for answers continues. The night Mary Denise Lands vanished was unremarkable in most ways. Just another chilly March evening in Marshall, Michigan. But for those who knew her, March 12, 2004, would become a dividing line between the life she had lived and the mystery she left behind. Mary was a woman of quiet strength, a 39-year-old medical billing specialist who had built a life centered around her 2 children, her work, and her family. She had a warmth about her, a kindness that made people trust her instantly. But in the months before her disappearance, that warmth had dimmed. The reason? Christopher Luke Pratt, her fiancé, her partner, and, as it would later become clear, her tormentor. To the outside world, Chris was charming, the kind of man who could make anyone laugh at a party. But behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. Mary had begun confiding in a cousin who worked at the hospital, showing up with bruises, broken fingers, injuries she begged her not to mention to her parents. She was trapped, isolated from friends and family, her world shrinking to the walls of the apartment she shared with Chris. Then, just days before she vanished, her parents, Clifford and Anita, moved to California. It was supposed to be a fresh start for them, a chance to enjoy their later years in the sun. Mary had hugged them goodbye, promising to visit soon. No one could have known it would be the last time they'd see her. On March 12th, Mary came home from work exhausted. Chris was there, along with his nephew Adam. An argument broke out, sharp words, raised voices. No one knows what sparked it, but by 10:30 p.m., Mary had had enough. She grabbed her favorite brown bomber jacket and her small white mesh purse, the one she always carried with her ID, credit cards, and a folded copy of her birth certificate inside. She didn't take her phone. She didn't take her keys. She didn't even take the engagement ring Chris had given her. She walked out into the cold, under the carport of their apartment complex, and vanished into the night. Chris didn't follow her. He didn't call the police. He didn't even check on her when she didn't come back. It wasn't until Sunday, nearly 2 days later, that Chris finally called Mary's parents in California. His tone was casual, almost indifferent. "Have you seen Mary?" As if she might have spontaneously flown across the country without a word. Her mother, Anita, knew instantly something was wrong. Mary would never just disappear. The family sprang into action. Mary's brother reported her missing, and soon, the small town of Marshall was buzzing with search parties, flyers, and whispered theories. But from the start, the investigation was plagued with problems. 36 hours after Mary vanished, Sergeant Tim Bryant of the Marshall Police Department made an 11-minute phone call to Chris Pratt's cell phone at 2 a.m. When questioned, Bryant claimed that Mary's childhood best friend, Sue Burkwalt, had borrowed his phone to call Chris from a bar called the Stagecoach. But Sue denied it. She had been home that night with her 2 young daughters. She didn't even go to bars. Later, Bryant changed his story, now claiming it was another officer, Rebecca Ivy, who had made the call. But no one could confirm that either. The question lingered. Why was a police officer calling a known drug dealer in the middle of the night, just hours after his fiancée disappeared? 3 months after Mary vanished, a family member spotted something chilling at a local flea market. Chris Pratt was selling Mary's belongings. Picture frames with photos still in them. Clothes. And, most damning of all, her brown bomber jacket. The same jacket he swore she was wearing when she walked away. When confronted, Chris quickly slapped a free sign on the items and fled. Then, on Mother's Day the following year, Chris showed up at Anita's workplace with a gift, Mary's birth certificate. The same one she always carried in her purse. The purse she supposedly took with her the night she vanished. As the years passed, Chris Pratt's true nature became undeniable. In 2007, he was convicted of unlawful imprisonment and criminal sexual conduct against his next-girlfriend, Noreen. He served only 4.5 years of a 15-year sentence. In 2018, he was arrested again, this time for sexually assaulting a 16-year-old girl. Yet despite his violent history, no charges were ever filed in Mary's disappearance. The Marshall Police Department's handling of the case was, at best, incompetent. At worst, it was suspicious. An entire year's worth of evidence, reports, notes, leads, was mysteriously lost. Tim Bryant, the officer who made that strange phone call, left the force under a cloud of rumors. Some whispered about drug deals, others about corruption. Mary's family begged for answers, but none came. Mary was declared legally dead in 2011, but her case remains open. Her parents, now elderly, still wait for justice. Her children, now adults, still wonder what really happened to their mother. Some say Chris Pratt knows more than he's ever admitted. Others believe there are people in that small town who have stayed silent for too long. But one thing is certain. Mary Denise Lands didn't just disappear. Someone made sure of it. And someday, the truth may finally come to light. On the evening of February 15th, 2001, 12-year-old Stephen Kraft Jr. was last seen playing with his family's two dogs near his home in the 2100 block of Holly Drive in Benton Harbor, Michigan. The young boy, dressed in a gray sweatshirt and gray sweatpants with a white stripe, was enjoying the last moments of daylight between 7 o'clock and 8 p.m. as he walked the family pets. When his mother, Lori, called him inside for dinner, he never returned. His sudden disappearance sparked immediate concern. The temperature that night was below freezing, and Stephen was not wearing a hat or gloves. Authorities and family members knew he could not have survived long without shelter in such conditions. Stephen's footprints were later traced near an iced-over pond close to his home, leading investigators toward Harbor Haven Ministries on Irving Street, just 1 block south of Holly Drive. But the footprints, much like Stephen, seemed to vanish without further trace. 3 days later, the first significant clue emerged when one of the family's dogs, a German Shepherd Chow mix, returned home alone late in the evening. The dog's behavior was unusual. It appeared anxious and seemed to want to lead its owners to a particular area. However, an extensive search yielded no signs of Stephen. The following day, Stephen's second dog, a 6-month-old German Shepherd puppy, was found near Blue Creek, a 1.5 miles north of the Kraft residence. The dog's separation and movements only deepened the mystery. Stephen, a 6th grader at Hull Elementary School, had just completed a 5-day suspension for defending himself in a physical altercation with another student. This was his first disciplinary action, and teachers described him as a quiet boy with few friends. Those who knew him stated that he was familiar with the neighborhood, which consisted of a dead-end street with little traffic. Given the familiarity of the area and his routine, his vanishing without a trace was perplexing. Stephen's parents, Lori and Stephen Kraft Sr., were devastated. They initially believed their son may have wandered off and gotten lost, but as days passed without any sign of him, they began to suspect foul play. The family's home was later demolished in 2005, and they relocated to Hagar Township, Michigan, but they never stopped searching for answers. Authorities searched extensively, including a thorough investigation of a 4-mile stretch of Blue Creek and the pond behind Harbor Haven Ministries in May 2001. Despite their efforts, nothing was found. Another search in November 2002 focused on wooded areas near the southwestern Michigan Regional Airport, but again, no evidence of Stephen's whereabouts surfaced. In February 2004, hope briefly flickered when a tip suggested that Stephen had been spotted at Midway Airport in Chicago, Illinois. Investigators followed up, but the individual turned out to be someone else. It was yet another frustrating dead end in a case that was growing colder by the year. Theories surrounding Stephen's disappearance range from abduction to the possibility that he ran away, though there was no indication that he had any intention to do so. With no solid leads, his case remains open and unsolved. Renee Kyles was a devoted mother and grandmother, known for her vibrant personality and warm smile. On September 8, 2007, she left her daughter's residence on Southworth Terrace in Kalamazoo, Michigan, with plans to watch a college football game at a friend's house. But that day would mark the last time her loved ones would ever see her. Later that same day, Renee was seen getting into a black Pontiac Vibe in front of her home in the 1200 block of Portage Street. After that, she vanished without a trace. Her family grew concerned when days passed without any word from her. Renee was known to stay in close contact with her daughter and granddaughter, so her sudden silence was deeply troubling. Her family officially reported her missing on September 17th, 9 days after her disappearance. On September 19th, Renee's 49th birthday, her Toyota Camry was found abandoned in the 1900 block of Portage Street, just a short distance from where she was last seen. The vehicle presented a perplexing scene. One of the windows had been shattered, though it was unclear if anything had been stolen. Inside the trunk, investigators discovered her clothes and a suitcase, adding to the mounting concerns about her welfare. Photographs of her Camry circulated in the media, yet no concrete leads emerged. The shattered window hinted at foul play, but there were no clear signs of violence inside the vehicle. Authorities hoped that surveillance footage or eyewitness accounts would provide critical insights, but the trail quickly went cold. Born and raised in Chicago, Renee relocated to Kalamazoo in 1999 to be closer to her family. She had a particularly strong bond with her daughter and granddaughter, always making them her top priority. Friends described her as outgoing and generous, with a deep love for her community. She was well-known and well-liked, making her sudden disappearance all the more baffling. Renee relied on government assistance programs, including food stamps. However, since the day she went missing, there had been no record of any activity on her account. Investigators believe this indicated she had not voluntarily walked away from her life. Her absence from family events, especially her birthday, further supported the notion that something sinister had occurred. Authorities have not publicly named any suspects, but foul play remains a strong possibility. The circumstances surrounding the abandoned car, the broken window, and Renee's disappearance painted a troubling picture. Did she willingly get into the black Pontiac vibe, or was she coerced? Could the individual driving that car hold the key to solving her case? While no one has come forward with definitive answers, law enforcement continues to investigate every lead. Renee's family has made numerous public pleas, desperate for any information that might provide closure. The most heartbreaking aspect of Renee's disappearance is the void it left in her family's life. Her daughter and granddaughter, once accustomed to her constant presence, now grapple with unanswered questions and an unbearable sense of loss. Despite the passage of time, Renee's loved ones refuse to give up hope. They remain determined to keep her memory alive, believing that someone knows what happened on that fateful day in September 2007. The Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety urges anyone with information about Renee Kyles' disappearance to come forward. Even the smallest detail could prove crucial in solving this case. Contact. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of Renee Kyles or the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, please contact the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety at 337-8994.